Hello, everyone. My name is Anders Nilsson, and I'm the Technical Solutions Consultant for Micro Focus, working with LoadRunner Cloud and LoadRunner Enterprise. And I'm going to talk about some of the what's new changes here today that's been introduced in LoadRunner Enterprise 2020 and in the free service packs that have been released since. And I will also include some usage tips around functionality that has changed, then mostly in the administration part. And I will do a combination of a few slides first, a bit of a PowerPointing, and then I will do it more like a Delta demo where I'll be highlighting the more important changes from the earlier versions. And now, due to the amount of people attending today, I've muted all or most of attendance during this presentation. And then at the end, we can try to do a bit of a Q&A where I try to answer any questions that have been asked in the WebEx chat window. So if you have a question, please enter it in the chat window and I'll address them at the end. And please also keep in mind that you don't have to ask your questions here today in this forum, since you can always ask them to your CSM as well, and then we can answer them later on in that way. And while I can't cover exactly everything what's new in this presentation today, all of those details are, of course, available online at the ADM Help Center, for which the URL is on the screen at the moment, and then under LoadRunner Enterprise, and then under what's new for each of those service packs. And each of the releases also have a video, which shows most of the what's new features there. So for anyone looking to get all of the what's new details, this is then where to go to get those things. And considering the name of this presentation is LoadRunner Enterprise, I assume that most of you are aware of this already. But with the release of LoadRunner Enterprise 2020, the name change and the rebranding from Performance Center is now complete, and the name Performance Center and StormRunner Load are no more. And old LoadRunner is now known as LoadRunner Professional. And one of the biggest changes with LoadRunner Enterprise 2020 is the architecture change and the decoupling from ALM. So that ALM and LoadRunner Enterprise are now two separate products. Some of you might remember that Quality Center and Performance Center were two separate products many years ago, before they were then joined together under the name ALM. And they have now moved back again to being two separate products. And that means that there is no longer any ALM QC server in the backend, nor any shared ALM QC database or file server, meaning that LoadRunner Enterprise now has its own dedicated backend. And of course, these details are details that are transparent to you since you are using LoadRunner Enterprise on SaaS. But this decoupling is what has taken out or took up most of the R&D effort with LoadRunner Enterprise 2020. And this decoupling also means that there is no more ALM desktop client, nor are there any components that are needed to be downloaded. So it's all now 100% web-based, just like my Performance Center was in ALM PC. So for anyone working in a restricted or a lockdown environment, there are no longer any need for distributing any MSI files with the ALM components like you had to do in the past. So you can simply log right into LRE 2020 from any available machine. And let me switch over here to the demo. All right, so if we now look at the new welcome page here, there are now only two areas. We have the application side of things and we have the administration side. So there is no longer any lab management or any SaaS administration, since those areas or modules are now all rolled into the new administration here. So I'm going to log into the administration here. And if we start in here, this looks a lot like the old lab management, but with the added project and user management modules down here. And while this might not be what's new functionality, so to say, but I will cover it in this since it's new in this location anyway. And I'm now logged in here as a tenant admin. And this is the type of user that your administrators will have. And if we start in the users module here, this is then where we go and where we set up and add all the new users to the product. And there are two types of users in here. So we have the tenant admins, and we have, well, I like to call them basic users, or they are just marked as not administrator types here. So, and the tenant admin is for the users that should have access to the administration, and will be the ones that create new users and projects, which is the type of user I'm logged in as at the moment. Then the basic users, or the not administrators, they are for the users that are only to log in to the application side in order to set up and run performance tests. And they will have a role attached to them as well, which I will then show later on. And for those of you that have a large user base to configure, there is now the ability to import users directly from an Excel file and directly into the administration here. And the specifications or how to configure that Excel file is available in the online help. So, but if you have a large group and you have them in an Excel file in a certain format, then you can just import them directly into the administration here. And if we continue to the roles and permissions module, there used to be a quite large number of different roles in Performance Center, about seven or eight or so, and that could be assigned to the basic users. And that has now been narrowed down or streamlined down to only 2 roles. So we have the performance tester here, which have access to, well, everything you can literally do in the application side of things. And then you have a viewer user as well, which serves as it has access to everything, but only with read-only permissions. But if you do have any other requirements within your organization with something that would fall between those 2 end types of users, you can then go in and create your own role here. So you basically just give it a name, and then you select from all the checkboxes here what specific bytes that user should have, or that role should have, and then you can assign that to your users. So it's really flexible in here. And then if we move into the projects, this is then where we create our new domains, and of course where we create our projects. And this is also where we set up or add the licenses for the different projects. And creating a new domain is just a matter of clicking the button here, clicking the plus sign again, and then give it a name, and we will have a new domain created to us. And adding a project is done in a similar way. Just click the plus button here. And when we do that, when we're creating a project, it will look exactly the same as if we are looking at or we are editing a project. So I'm just going to click on an existing project here instead. And in here, we have, of course, all the needed information related to the project. And this is also where we assign which host pool our project should be using. So this is very important. So when you create a project for the first time, it will automatically be assigned to the general pool, or it might be called the default pool. But you always have to then, if you aren't using the general pool and you have a specific pool that you want that contains your hosts for that specific project, you just go in here and then you are just select the pool here, which one you want to use. And this is also where you set up distribute the license to a different project. So you can either distribute all of the license to it, or you can distribute a subset of a license. And if you're not sure about what your license limitations are, one way to check is basically just go into either the user limit here, for example, and set a large number here, and it will then bring up what limitations are, and that works for example, for the concurrent runs limit as well. So we can see that I'm limited to 1 concurrent run for this project here. Then under the users section, this is then where we can assign our users to the project, and then also we can give them or assign to them a specific role. So we can see that my user here, I'm assigned to this project and I have the role of a performance tester. So I'm just going to cancel out from here. Then in the audit section here, this is where most of the changes are logged or tracked, so to say. So, and then under the connection audit, there is now the added ability to track user login and logout of the connections, both to the Loader Enterprise and to the administration, which has been requested in the past. So we can see here that I've been logged in and logged out quite a number of times here. Now, if we move on to the cloud area, there is a new cloud feature which is called Cloudburst, and that's why we have a big banner up here. And that adds support for running load generators on the cloud using a Loader Enterprise Cloudburst account. And this enables you to dynamically provision hosts on demand on either AWS, Azure, or on Google Cloud without having your own subscription with those cloud providers. And how it works is that you get a Cloudburst license or account with Micro Focus, and then we take care of the billing between the different cloud providers and you. So you don't need your own account with them. Of course, it's still possible to add your own cloud account that you might have with either AWS or Azure and use that, as it's been possible in some previous versions. And if you do so, there is now support for additional event logs, which display the events that occur when creating the cloud account, and then also the severity of each event. So if there are any issues when adding a cloud account, there will now be additional information logged that might help in the troubleshooting. And another change when using your own cloud account is that there is now added support for elastic provisioning and deprovisioning of the cloud load generators. The difference from the previous versions is that you don't need to spin up the cloud load generators in advance. You can simply add the load generators to the test as normal and start off the test, and the load generators will then be spun up for you. And once the test has finished and been collated, the load generators are then spun down again. And then also when we're talking about the cloud, the REST API has also been updated to add the functionality needed around specifying elastic cloud load generators when setting up a test. So this can now also be automated through the API. Then here under site configurations and in SSO, Loader Enterprise now supports working with SSO authentication, which enables your user to use single sign-on for logging into Loader Enterprise as they would with any other SSO application. And we currently support, I think, 13 of the most common identity providers, but in general, any identity provider that works or with SAML 2 is now supported as well. Then if we go down to reports here, depending on your previous access to lab management, or if you had access or not in the past, your administrators will now have access to the built-in project-wide reporting here. So it will be very easy to get an overview of your usage on the instance. And there are quite a few reports in here, and they can all be filtered. If we look up here, there's a filter symbol. They can all be filtered on a specific time range, and you can also filter on specific projects. And since this is a demo instance, there are only 2 projects in here. But if you have a large list of projects, you can then filter on which specific, or maybe only one project, and get the reports for that. And there is a large number of reports here, so I won't cover all of them. I'm just going to point out 2 of them. And for example, the first one here is the Concurrency Report, and this one is very useful to use to get an overview around how you're making use of your license when it comes to, for example, concurrent runs or concurrent virtual users. And then the second one is the license usage and protocol granularity. And this then provides an overview around what specific protocols are in use and what numbers of other users. So if you have a license for a large number of different protocols, this is where you can then go and see how you are making use of those protocols. Again, there are a large number of projects or reports available to you here. And again, you can apply filters in all of them. So once you have access, I would recommend you to take a look at what's available to you and see how you can make use of that. Now, the rest of the modules here on the left-hand side are more or less the same as in 12.6.3. So I want to go over those now, and I'm going to move over to the application side of things. So of course the application side is of course where we go to set up and run our performance tests, and it has a similar look and feel as the My Performance Center link in 12.6.3. So if I move into the hosts area here, this again, it looks exactly like in PC 12.6.3, but if we look at one of the installations here, it's listed as a 1LG, and that is a new combined standalone load generator installation for all of the LoadRunner family products. So LoadRunner Professional, LoadRunner Cloud, and also Enterprise are now all using the same installer. And as normal, you go in here under Download Applications, and it's listed here. So you just click that button and download it. And then when it comes to installing it, let me swap over to the PowerPoint here. Then you select the relevant LoadRunner product during installation. And if you later on need to swap to a different LoadRunner product, you can then simply just rerun the installer and then change to the required product. But please keep in mind that even though that the load generator can only act as a load generator for one product at a time, so it can't, for example, serve as both for both LoadRunner Enterprise and LoadRunner Cloud at the same time. So you have to go in and swap there between what you want to have. And there we are. All right, then if we go into monitors here, and I haven't really set anything up here, so I'm just going to highlight something in the online help. So while LoadRunner Enterprise has supported integrations with third-party monitor solutions like New Relic and AppDynamics for some time now, we've now added support for Dynatrace running on SaaS. And we're already supporting Dynatrace on premises, or Appmon as it's called, since some time in the past, but now we also support their SaaS solution as well. So if you are making use of any of those third-party monitors, we do recommend that you integrate them into LoadRunner Enterprise, because that would help with correlation when you do run and do the analysis of your tests afterwards. And if we move into test management here, then in regards to the types of scripts that we can use, we've supported JMeter for quite some time now, and they now also added support for Gatling scripts here, so to run them from LoadRunner Enterprise as well, although this is still as a tech preview. UFT1 scripts, both GUI and API, are now also supported. And if I select a simple web script here, we now have the possibility to edit our script. So while in the past we've always been able to view the script in Performance Center or LoadRunner Enterprise, but now we have a possibility to actually go in and edit it as well. So I can go in here, I can remove a comment if I want to, but I can also uncomment a certain line in the script, etc. But there is no error checking here, and there's certainly no compilation. So any edits you do in here, you need to be sure of them, so to say. So I would recommend it to keep it to, as I did, uncomment pieces of code, or to fix maybe misspellings in transaction names. So just very minor changes. So if you need to do any major changes, I still recommend you to download the script and do that in VUGen, and then so you can actually compile it and test it there and then before you re-upload it. And there's also a new thing, which is where you can edit the parameters. And it hasn't been enabled here, so I'm gonna just swap over here again. And when you click that button, the Edit Parameters button, you will get this window popping up. And this is more or less the same access as you have in VUGen. So for me, this is a big thing. So you know that in the past, you had your script and you realized that, okay, I need to change some parameters or values or edit them or add them. Now you can, instead of having, in the past, you have to download that to VUGen, make changes there, compile it and re-upload it. But now you can do it in Lower Enterprise directly. So you can go in here, you can add parameters, you can even create new parameters, but you can also select or change how the next parameter is selected. So for now it says sequential, but if I want to change that to random or to unique, I can also do that from inside here without having to go through the VUGen. So for me, that's quite a big thing. And this editing and of the parameters and the script is now also supported for dev web scripts. So if I select one of the scripts here now, we can also go in and edit this if we have a need for it. But again, there's no error checking here, so you should just stick to fixing minor issues as well. And with DevWeb, now we also support for changing the DevWeb runtime settings from inside the GUI here. And we also have enabled that DevWeb scripts to display snapshots on error as well. So if I then select a test here, for the tester scenarios here, there is a new feature called coded test. And this is also a tech preview, and it can be used to programmatically setting up or editing performance tests. Basically, it lists the complete scenario or test as a big XML file or a blob, and it can we can either we can edit it directly in here again. I can just go in here and edit or change as I want through the browser, but it can also serve as a reference for when editing tests using REST API. So for example, if you try to configure a setting that isn't directly exposed through the API, I think that some customers use this already for automatically configuring their SLAs, because at the moment I think that setting up or changing SLAs isn't exposed through REST API. So what they did was basically they just downloaded this whole blob, then they looked up where the SLAs were defined, they changed that programmatically, and then re-uploaded this through REST API. So that meant that, yeah, they could again automate their SLAs. And but another scenario is also, I would assume that it could be useful if you, for example, would like to copy one scenario from one project to another, so that you can then just simply copy and paste the XML from one project to another, or that you simply use REST API to download and upload the XML to and from the different projects. And all that subject again, REST API has also seen some additions, and support for managing projects and managing users have been added now, as has support for dealing with Elastic Cloud load generators. So if you haven't checked out REST API in the past, I would recommend you to do so, since it can assist with many automation setups within DevOps, for example. So if I then go to edit test here, the edit test page here has been redesigned, and where we previously had a number of tabs out here on the left, these have now been reduced and put onto the top here. So now we have groups and workload, assets, and SLAs. So if I start on the SLA tab here, this is where we can define our service level agreements if required or wanted. And setting it up has been changed around a little bit, but what's new here is that we now support something called AppDex. And which AppDex stands for Application Performance Index. And it's an open standard used for measuring performance of software applications with the purpose of converting measurements into insights about user satisfaction. And I would recommend the Wikipedia article about it, but loosely explained, it works so that instead of defining a hard pass or fail threshold, you instead define a maximum tolerated threshold, and the responses are then divided into 3 user experience groups that we can see here. So we have satisfied, tolerating, and frustrated. So if you're unhappy basing your SLAs on either percentile or average, then AppDex might be for you. Then under assets, this is where we can add any required monitors profiles as in the past. And we can also change the analysis template for the load test if required. And the template is created in the offline analysis tool, and you then upload the zipped up template here. And if you select it for the test, that's what the analysis report for the test will be based on once it's finished. Then on the groups and workload tab, which is of course where we set up the load test. And here we have this scheduler that, well, it moved out to the right here instead of being at the bottom. And we also have a tab here for the load generator setup if we want to change that around a little bit. And but it works more or less as in the previous versions. And if we look at the assign load generator button here, is a drop down. And if you are making use of the Cloudburst, then this is where you go if you want to assign such Cloudburst load generators to your test here. But yeah, it's been grayed out here since we haven't configured that. And then some of the buttons that used to be up here, they have now been relegated to the more button here. So for example, we have the, if you want to edit the command line, you have it under the drop down here. But you also have, if we go into the test options and we look at the collate tab here, we now have the option to start collating the results during the course of a test run, which reduces the time required to collate all data at the end of a test run, which can be beneficial, especially if you're running a long test with a large amount of data. Now, this doesn't mean that you can download the raw results file during the test run. It just means that the results are trickling in during the test. So at the end of a test, the final collation is a lot quicker. Then the scripts and the groups row now have an added context menu here. So if I right click on it, we can, for example, see we can access the runtime settings for that group. And there's also the ability to deactivate or reactivate a script group, and which is good if you just quickly would like to temporarily remove a certain script from a test run, but not actually deleting it. So if you have a scenario with 10 different scripts in it and you need to remove one of them for some troubleshooting, you can now just go in here, right click and deactivate it and run your test. And then later on when you want to have it available again, you just do the same thing, you right click and then click reactivate, and it will be back in your test for you. All right, so let me start this test here. So the test startup page here, we used to have a checkbox items and a long list. They have now been divided into the 4 groups we see here. And then mouse over on them basically shows which items need to be finished before the test is ready to start. And so Now we have green, and we wait for the controller to be ready, and then the test is starting off. And for those of you who are upgrading from a later version, like the PC 1260 range, I don't think there are any changes on the test run screen here that I've discovered. But if any one of you are used to a really old version of the PC or LRE, there are a number of changes here. And first and foremost, the run screen looks identical. Relevant if we look at it during the actual running of a test, or if we are looking at the results of the finished tests. And the graphs and the user groups are now also on separate tabs. So if I go into the groups page, this is then where we see where we can manipulate our running virtual users. And then we have a transaction tab which highlights all the transactions that are in the test. And we have the output messages as well here. But yeah, I won't spend too much time here since the majority of you already are used to this view. So I'm going to go in and select a run that's already finished. So I'll take this here. And yeah, so as you can see here, the finished test that stopped running looks identical to the view of the running test. And so I'm going to head over to the HTML report here. And the UI has been updated to a more modern look, and it's also now a little bit more interactive in here. But the graphs out on the left here are still the same as in the past. And if you are using SLAs in the test, then we have the SLA violations report here, which shows the X worst transactions that exceeded the SLA boundary during the run, and also the status of the SLA measurements throughout the running of the test. And if we, for example, then look at the average transaction response time graph here, we can now also filter on the transactions shown in the graph by basically just selecting or remove what we don't want to see in this graph here. And this can be very beneficial because, as you know, in the past, if you run a test with a large number of transactions in it, then this graph in the HTML report was rather hard to read. But now it makes it a little bit more usable since you can just go in and select the specific transaction that you would like to see. Then if we, on the results tab here, just to highlight that we still, of course, have the access to the expected items here, basically including the raw results and the output.mdb database file, and of course also the offline version of the HTML report. And when you open that in a browser, it will again look exactly as we saw on the previous screen here. All right, so this is basically what I wanted to highlight here today. And as mentioned earlier, if you go to the online help, the admhelp.microfocus.com, and you go into lower enterprise and select which version you are on, there is a very good what's new section here. And there is one for each of the new versions, older enterprise. And there are a number of videos, and all the different items have been outlined here as well for those who would like to delve deeper into this.